Today we're going to just do a general overview, introduction of anatomy and physiology. Anatomy is the study of structure, and physiology is a study of function. Now the tools for studying all of them involve especially knowing your terminology. If you can master your terminology, you will be halfway there. That's the most important thing, and I would go to the end of each chapter and look at the terms and start to learn them. Okay, tools. You have to be able to study physiology. You have to look at different levels: molecular, chemical, systemic. Know a little bit about physics and a little bit about chemistry. Not much, just a very little. Principle of complementarity is that anatomy and physiology are inseparable. Anatomy depends on physiology and the other way around. For instance, we don't care what a heart looks like if we don't know what it does. Okay, and I'll skip ahead to the next slide here. We start looking at a chemical level, your atoms, subatomic particles, and how they form molecules. The molecules gather together and form cells, which are made up of their little organelles. And the organelles, the cells come together to form tissues. Tissues come together to form organs. And organs come together to form organ systems. And then the entire organism, in this case a man, is made up of the combination of all these. We'll talk about the different systems, and this is the way we study anatomy and physiology in this book, is by systems. We first talk about the integument. The integument is the skin, hair, glands, sweat glands, oil glands, cutaneous sensors. They're very important. Synthesizing vitamin D is a big thing, just protecting your body from the outside world. Also, pain sensation. Nobody wants to have pain, but without pain, we don't know when we're hurt, and therefore we may go ahead and injure ourselves worse. This is what happens to diabetic people when they lose limbs. They can't feel the pain. Okay, the skeleton is for supporting the body and giving the muscles something to work with so they can cause movement. Blood cells are formed within the bones, and the bone stores minerals. For instance, calcium. If your calcium level is extremely low or extremely high, either one, it's going to kill you, like now. And so if you have too much calcium in your bloodstream, your body just sticks it in your bones to store. If you have too little, you'll pull it out of your bones. Muscles for movement, maintaining posture, and also producing heat. The nervous system is responsible for controlling everything that you do or think, everything about you. The endocrine system is a system of hormones. Hormones are released from the gland into the bloodstream, and then they act on things that have receptors for those hormones. Cardiovascular system is for transport of blood and the things it carries. Lymphatic system is an important part of your immune system. It also picks up any type of foreign substance, bacteria, as it picks up fluid that leaks beyond the cardiovascular system and filters it and helps keep you from getting sick. Respiratory system brings in oxygen, removes carbon dioxide. Digestive system breaks foodstuffs down to the molecular level, and where they can cross the barrier of the gut into the bloodstream, and anything that's undigestible is eliminated as feces. Urinary system eliminates nitrogenous wastes such as urea, uric acid, creatinine, and also is important for maintaining acid, base, and blood balance, electrolyte balance. And any of these things that get just a little bit off can kill you. It also is important for maintaining blood pressure. Okay, reproductive system is for making babies. And also the organs, the hormones that we produce make males be male and females be female. And whether it's politically correct or not, males are different than females. Okay, organ systems, they each depend on the other organ systems to work together to maintain life functions. Maintaining boundaries is one necessary life function. The skin keeps your insides in and things outside out. Plasma membrane does the same thing to cells. It decides what can get in and what can't. Movement. Muscle causes movement of the body, things that need to be moved. The body has to be able to respond to its environment, such as breathing rate is controlled. Digestion, breaking down food stuff and then absorbing them into the bloodstream. Metabolism is all the chemical reactions in the body. Catabolism is breaking stuff down. Anabolism is building stuff up. Excretion is getting rid of waste products. Okay, reproduction. We have cellular reproduction where skin cells reproduce so you can grow, repair skin or grow new skin, or also for producing offspring. In growth, each body part and each cell has to grow so that it can reproduce. Okay, nutrients are essential for energy and bodybuilding. Carbohydrates, yes, they are essential to your existence. Fats, proteins, minerals, vitamins. Oxygen is necessary because it releases energy from your food. It's essentially a slow burn, and it takes this energy and creates, well, it takes adenosine diphosphate and turns it into adenosine triphosphate, ATP, which is a charged battery of your cell. Now, we need oxygen because without oxygen, we can't grow our, we can't make our motor go. Here he's putting oxygen, he's putting gasoline into his car. Unless he burns that gasoline, the car will just sit there. And burning is combination with oxygen. Now, if you don't combine it with oxygen, you cover it up, you don't get burning. The fuel is not able to be used. Same thing with your body. If you don't have oxygen, you don't have fuel available to burn, and so therefore your cells die and you die. Water is the most abundant chemical in the body. It's important for chemical reactions, and we'll talk about other things it does too. We also have to keep a normal body temperature. Atmospheric pressure has to be kept at about the right place, or we can't get gas exchange in the lungs. Now, these are books, not actually the atmosphere, but this book has very few books on top of it. Therefore, it has a very small amount of gravitational push down. This book, on the other hand, has a tremendous amount of books sitting on top of it, so there's a lot of pressure down. At sea level, we think about being at this level of book. A lot of air stacked up, so we have high pressure. Enough pressure to easily push plenty of air into our lungs so we open up our lungs to breathe. At high elevations, the air is spread out because there's nothing squishing it down, essentially. And so you may find yourself lacking enough air, oxygen in the air. You breathe and you can have trouble getting enough oxygen. Okay, homeostasis is a maintenance of a relatively stable internal environment. For instance, if it's 100 degrees in the room, your body needs to be 98.6. If it's 40 degrees, 98.6. You have a stable environment. And we have control mechanisms. Generally, the nervous system and the endocrine system are essential for regulating bodily systems. Okay, now in a control mechanism, you have to have a receptor that picks up what's going on in the environment. The control system determines what you're going to do about it, and then the effector that actually does the work actually responds. So in a negative feedback system, such as body temperature, if you're too cold, here, the body temperature, the skin sensors pick that you're too cold. That signal goes to the brain. the hypothalamus of the brain. It says, oh, gee, it's cold down here, which then goes to your skeletal muscles. They shiver and you warm up. Now, the same thing if you're too hot. That's a negative feedback because you start with one thing, your response puts it back in balance. If you're too hot, you'll send messages from skin receptors to the hypothalamus in the brain, which then sends signals down to your sweat glands. You sweat, and assuming you live in an environment where you can actually evaporate sweat, then you'll cool off. Negative feedback, another example is antidiuretic hormone. Okay, diuresis, when you take a diuretic, it makes you go pee. Well, antidiuretic hormone prevents you from urinating as much. It causes you to conserve water. So when you get dehydrated, you will release antidiuretic hormone, and it will let you retain more water so you're less dehydrated. Now, we also have positive feedbacks systems, labor contractions, for instance. When you are in labor, oxytocin is released, which causes muscle contraction in the uterus. Uterine contraction causes oxytocin release, which causes more labor contraction until you finally have a baby. The blood clotting, if you're bleeding somewhere, you have more and more blood clotting until that bleeding is stopped. Otherwise, you won't stop bleeding. These are positive feedback mechanisms. The homeostatic imbalance, your book says it's disturbance or imbalance of homeostasis is increases risk of disease, but often it is a disease in itself. Okay, changes topics radically here, talking about anatomical position. Anatomical position is discussed because we have to have a common point to talk about parts from. Okay, standing up, body erect, feet slightly apart, palms facing forward. Here we have, see the palms facing forward, feet slightly apart, he's standing up. And always remember to discuss the patient's point of view. For instance, this is his left leg. You don't want to do surgery on the wrong knee. It gets you in trouble every time. Again, this is his left leg. Look at it from the patient's point of view. Okay, now anatomical studies were done on humans. And as you notice, they stand in different positions. So some of the terms we use in humans do not apply to our animal specimens, like when we dissect our pigs. Okay, superior and inferior work good on humans. Above is superior and below is inferior. But when you go back to your dog, which is what your average study was done on, it doesn't work because above would be this way. Now your superior vena cava is up here, but your cranial vena cava is here. So when we're talking about our specimens, we really need to use the terms cranial and caudal when working with our dissection animals. And we don't have any people to dissect, so we're going to have to stick with what we got. Same thing happens with anterior and posterior. Look back here at your dog. Okay, anterior is obvious. Posterior is in the back. But when we compare to the human, this is what compares to the human's anterior. This is what compares to the animal's posterior. Whereas the animal's posterior is here. So we don't want to use those terms when we're speaking of animals. We want to use dorsal here and ventral here. And that's what I prefer when talking about humans as well. Let's see, 2 slides ahead. Okay, there we go. Now, medial is along the midline, lateral is away from the midline, intermediate anywhere in between that. Proximal we're talking about limbs. Close to the point of the origin is proximal. The most distant from the limb is distal. Superficial is obvious, close to the surface. Deep is more internal. Now the body is divided into the axial, which is head, neck, and trunk regions and the appendicular regions. And we also talk about body planes. Transverse plane is right here. It's like you saw the person in half, the magician shot here. They don't really saw him in half. Median is going right down the middle here, and then a frontal plane is sawing him in half from, well, you see the plane here, right where your head is divided in half this way. Let's see, right like that. Okay, now here's the bad part. We do have anatomical variability. So you memorize where all the blood vessels are. You get ready to hit a vein, they're not always there. We have normal variation. Muscles are the same thing. If you're doing surgery, you'll find, especially in the abdominal muscles, some may be missing, some go where they're not supposed to go. You just have to understand it, just like our faces. They're very different. It's just normal variation. Okay, and the body is divided into cavities, and I'm just going to go to the pictures here. The dorsal cavity is made up of the cranial cavity and the vertebral cavity. So this is the dorsal side of the body. So where your brain goes and your spinal cord goes. And then the ventral cavity is all this. And then it's divided in half into the abdominopelvic cavity here, and then the thoracic cavity here. Now, thoracic cavity is divided into two pleural cavities where your hearts hang out, where your lungs hang out, excuse me. And then you have, after that, you have your mediastinal cavity here, which is divided into the cardial cavity where your heart is and the superior mediastinal cavity. Now, I've already said all that and all that and all that. Okay, the serosa is a membrane that separates all these cavities. It lines the walls. Parietal serosa lines the body walls. Visceral serosa is actually the outer coating of an organ. So in your gut, the visceral serosa is the outside of that gut, whereas the peritoneal lining is actually the parietal serosa. Now this is showing a balloon, a hand in a balloon. You see you have a double layer and air in here. Well, they're comparing that to the pericardial cavity, a double layer. The inner layer is actually the pericardium. It's actually the epicardium, which is part of the heart itself. And then you have a little bit of fluid here, and then you have the pericardium, which is a firm, very strong division here. It's actually a wrapper. Okay, division, quadrants, right upper quadrant, right lower quadrant, left upper, left lower. And then anatomists sometimes use 9 different divisions. They call this iliac, right and left, hypogastric, umbilical, epigastric, epi always means above, and then hypochondriac regions. We don't use those, we just use our quadrants. And then we also have others, oral and digestive cavity. You basically have one cavity going from mouth to anus. Nasal cavity, up your nose, orbital cavities where your eyes hang out, ear cavities, and synovial cavities are for joints. Okay, that's all I have on this chapter. Thank you very much.